A simple man was fixing her garage light. When she said, "You're handsome. You know that?" Daniel never knocked loudly. He always tapped twice, soft, respectful. That afternoon was no different. The sun was low, its golden light stretching across Claire's driveway in Maplewood, Ohio, as the quiet man from 3 streets down arrived holding a small toolbox and a gentle nod. Claire opened the door before he could knock. "Right on time," she said, her voice calm, faintly amused. She stepped aside, letting the scent of chamomile tea drift toward him. Garage lights still flickering. "Before we move further, please ensure to like, share, and subscribe for heartwarming stories like this." He nodded again, offering a faint smile. Words weren't his strong suit. Actions were. With his head slightly bowed, Daniel made his way around the house, toolbox swinging lightly in his grip. Claire followed a few steps behind, cup in hand, watching him with a mixture of curiosity and appreciation. There was something comforting about him. His worn denim jacket, the way his shoes scuffed softly against the gravel, how he moved with quiet purpose. The light above the garage door buzzed faintly, then dimmed. "I think the wiring's loose," Daniel murmured, more to the bulb than to Claire. He pulled the ladder into place, careful not to drag it across the concrete. She leaned against the doorframe, sipping her tea, content to watch. Up the ladder he climbed, steady and deliberate. His hands moved with the confidence of someone who didn't need to prove anything. Years of solitude had made him efficient but not hurried. There was grace in his slowness. Claire tilted her head slightly, studying him. There was nothing remarkable about Daniel at first glance. No sharp suits, no fancy watch, no cologne trailing behind him. And yet, something in his simplicity caught her off guard. Maybe it was the steadiness in his hands, or the way he didn't feel the need to fill the silence. She shifted her weight, feeling a strange flutter in her chest she hadn't felt in a long time. "There," Daniel said quietly, twisting the bulb into place. It blinked once, then came to life with a soft glow. He glanced down, meeting her eyes. "Should be fine now." Might have just been the contact point. Claire stepped forward, standing just beneath him. The light now cast a warm hue on his face. He looked down at her, expectant, ready to pack up and leave. Just another small task for a neighbor. But then she tilted her chin up, lips parting with a teasing, almost reckless smile. Her words came without warning. "You're handsome, you know that?" Time paused. Daniel froze midway through reaching for the screwdriver. The sentence hung between them, soft yet heavy, like a stone dropped into still water. His face flushed. He blinked once, then again, unsure if he'd heard right. I'm sorry." Claire laughed, not unkindly, just amused by the clear panic in his eyes. "I said you're handsome." She held his gaze for a moment, not backing down. "I just thought someone should tell you." He swallowed hard. "Oh, well, thank you." The words barely made it out, and he looked away, cheeks red, voice awkward but sincere. She took another sip of tea, still smiling, as if this were the most ordinary exchange in the world. But something had changed in the air, some invisible line crossed, something gentle but irreversible. Neither of them moved for a moment. Daniel finally climbed down, slowly, hands shaking slightly though he pretended otherwise. He packed up his tools without meeting her eyes again. Claire watched him, her smile softer now. "Let me know if it flickers again," he said, voice low, nearly a whisper. "I will," she replied. And just like that, he walked off into the fading light, quiet, unsure, but somehow different. Behind her, the garage light glowed steadily, casting long shadows that danced into the evening. What neither of them realized was that it wasn't the bulb that had sparked something that day. It was the silence between them finally interrupted. Daniel runs a small repair shop called Maplewood Handyfix, located on 114 Brookside Avenue, just a 10-minute walk from Claire's house. The leaves rustled softly along Brookside Avenue as Daniel walked his usual route back from the shop. His hands were in his pockets, head slightly bowed, as if trying to blend into the late afternoon quiet. That was when he heard her voice again, warm, light, familiar. "Daniel." He paused mid-step. Claire stood on her front porch, arms crossed, barefoot, a nervous smile tugging at her lips. "I made too much dinner," she said, almost casually. "Care to help me fix that?" He hesitated, looking at the street, then at her, then back again. The invitation hung between them like a drawn curtain, simple on the surface, but layered with meaning. After a second that felt longer than it was, he gave a short nod. Inside, the house smelled of roasted vegetables and thyme. The table was modest, 2 plates, candles she probably hadn't lit in years, mismatched napkins folded with care. Claire poured him a glass of water before sitting opposite him, her movements graceful but uncertain. They began eating in silence. The clinking of forks was louder than either expected. So she started, searching for footing. How's the handyman business at Maplewood Handy Fix? He looked up, grateful for the neutral territory. Steady. Quiet town helps. Claire smiled, twirling her fork. I like quiet. It makes the small things feel bigger. Daniel nodded. Noise hides too much. A beat of silence followed, not uncomfortable, just full. Like two people slowly settling into a room they weren't sure they were allowed to enter. They shifted from town gossip to books, then to memories that flickered like candlelight, gentle, cautious. She told him about her students at the university, about the poetry she used to read aloud in the mornings before the divorce made her voice go softer. Daniel didn't interrupt. He rarely did. But something about the way he listened, so completely, made her keep talking. I wasn't always like this, Claire said, her voice quieter now. Muted. I used to fill a room without trying. She looked down at her plate, then up again. Marriage can strip parts of you away, bit by bit. You stop noticing until there's not much left. Daniel didn't flinch. He simply looked at her, really looked. No pity, no judgment, just presence. I'm sorry, he said, and though the words were few, they were full. Claire nodded, eyes distant. I'm not anymore. It just gets lonely. Daniel shifted in his seat, fingers tapping lightly against the glass. Loneliness has a way of sounding different in every room. I know that tune. They both let out a breath at the same time, an unspoken agreement forming across the table. Something had cracked open, but gently, respectfully. Not enough to let in everything, but just enough to breathe. He didn't ask questions. She didn't push for stories. Yet somehow, they knew pieces of each other now, stitched together through slow, honest exchange. As the meal drew to a close, Claire reached for the dishes, and Daniel stood to help without being asked. Their hands brushed once, briefly, electricity in the quiet, and both noticed, though neither said a word. Claire walked him to the door. The air outside was cooler now, scented with pine and autumn. Thank you, she said, for coming. Daniel looked at her, eyes steady, voice low. Thank you for asking. Then he turned and walked into the fading twilight, footsteps light, but the weight in his chest heavier in a good way. Inside, Claire closed the door slowly, back pressed against it, eyes lingering on the space he had just occupied. Something was changing. She could feel it in the quiet. The sun beamed gently through patches of cotton-white clouds as Daniel stepped into Claire's backyard. A tangle of green sprawled across the space, ivy creeping where it shouldn't, rose bushes hunched under the weight of neglect, and the scent of lavender clinging to the morning air. Claire stood near the wooden fence, sleeves rolled, shovel in hand, her hair pulled back carelessly. You sure you're up for this jungle? She called out with a teasing glint. Daniel offered a rare, crooked grin. I've seen worse. They worked in silence at first, knees deep in soil, pruning, digging, pulling life back into what had long been forgotten. Birds fluttered above them, chirping as if offering background music to a scene neither had scripted but both were slowly writing. Claire chatted about plants she used to grow. Basil for her old recipes, mint for iced tea on summer nights. Daniel listened while tending to a stubborn patch of weeds, his hands steady and practiced. He wasn't much of a talker, but when he did speak, it was with intention. That she had come to appreciate. Time drifted unnoticed until the wind changed. A single drop landed on Claire's cheek, then another on Daniel's arm. They both looked up just as the sky darkened. Rain fell fast, urgent, unpredictable. Claire let out a surprised laugh. Well, so much for sunshine. Daniel shielded his eyes, blinked at the sky, and chuckled under his breath. Come on. Claire grabbed his wrist, tugging him toward the porch. They sprinted across the yard, muddy boots squelching in the grass, laughter following them like children playing in a summer storm. They reached the cover of the porch, drenched and breathless. The rain beat down around them, cascading off the roof in shimmering sheets. Claire leaned against the beam, water dripping from her lashes, her cheeks flushed from the rush. Daniel stood a foot away, shirt clinging to him, hair soaked and falling into his eyes. Without thinking, Claire stepped forward, her fingers brushing gently against his temple. She wiped a droplet that had paused at the corner of his brow, then another on his cheek. Her touch was light, like a whisper, but it made Daniel forget how to breathe for a moment. Her eyes lingered on his. I haven't felt this alive in years, she said softly, her voice almost lost in the rhythm of the rain. He didn't respond, not with words. But something in the way his gaze held hers, unblinking and open, said everything. His heart beat wildly in his chest, unfamiliar and reckless, but his body stayed still, grounded by her presence. He blushed again, of course. That quiet redness that crept along his neck when her words reached too deep. But he didn't turn away. Not this time, Claire noticed. She didn't move either. For a long moment, the world shrank to just the space between them. The storm faded into a distant murmur, the garden behind them forgotten. There were only two people, drenched in possibility. Daniel finally looked down, hands twitching slightly, and gave the faintest smile. She smiled back, warm, knowing, unhurried. Neither of them stepped forward, but neither stepped back. The rain continued. In that pause, between one heartbeat and the next, something bloomed. Not sudden or wild like the storm, but steady. A seed, newly planted, uncertain but rooted. They stood like that until the clouds began to part. And even as the sun returned, they didn't speak of what had just passed between them. Some things, after all, didn't need to be spoken. The room was quiet, too quiet. The kind of silence that didn't comfort, but echoed. Daniel sat on the edge of his worn sofa, elbows on his knees, holding a photograph between fingers that had fixed broken things for years but couldn't mend the emptiness inside. The photo was faded at the edges. A woman smiled back at him, eyes full of light, her hand resting on his shoulder like she never meant to let go. Her name was Marlene, his wife, his anchor. 6 years gone, but some nights, it still felt like yesterday. The memory arrived without permission. She was laughing barefoot in the kitchen, apron dusted with flour, teasing him about burning the toast again. He chased her around the table with a spatula, pretending to be outraged, while she laughed so hard she cried. Then the hospital. The pale sheets. The silence between diagnoses. Her hand, once so warm, becoming still in his. Daniel blinked, and the image dissolved. The photo remained in his hands, quiet proof of a life that once was. He leaned back, eyes on the ceiling, breathing slowly as if doing so might hold back the flood of grief always lapping at the edges. Down the street, Claire sat curled on her couch, phone pressed to her ear. "You sound different," her sister said on the other end. Claire smiled faintly, pulling a throw blanket tighter around her. "I think I met someone." There was a pause. "Oh, he's not like the men I used to fall for. He doesn't fill space with words or act like he owns the room." Her voice softened. "He listens, really listens. He fixes things with his hands. Doesn't rush, doesn't judge." Her sister exhaled gently. "Sounds refreshing." Claire let the silence stretch. "I just don't know if I'm ready, or if I even deserve it." "Deserve what?" "Happiness," she said plainly. "After everything with Mark, I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, for it to fall apart again." "Maybe it won't," her sister replied. "Maybe this time, it's not about fixing you, but finding someone who sees you whole." Claire swallowed, staring out the window. Rain tapped gently on the glass, left over from the storm earlier. She thought of Daniel standing in her backyard, soaked, blushing, unable to meet her gaze after she wiped the rain from his face. That moment had lingered in her chest all day like a pulse beneath the surface. Back in his apartment, Daniel placed the photo back into its wooden frame and set it on the side table beside the only plant he hadn't managed to kill. He stood slowly, joints stiff, and walked to the window. The streetlight outside buzzed softly. It lit the road that led to Claire's house. He didn't move, only stared, not at the light, but at the possibility of something beyond the quiet he'd lived in for so long. The grief had carved space into him, and now, someone, was stepping into it. Claire, meanwhile, tucked her phone away and stared at her ceiling. What if he's still broken too? She whispered aloud, as if to no one. Neither of them knew the answer, but both were wondering the same thing. What happens when two people carrying ghosts begin to reach for something living? Outside, the rain had stopped, but neither heart had. Maplewood's annual summer festival had a way of making the town feel smaller. Streets once quiet and sleepy burst to life with laughter, flickering lights, and the sweet scent of kettle corn swirling in the air. Children darted between booths, couples strolled hand in hand, and the soft hum of music carried down Main Street like a familiar melody. Daniel stood at the edge of it all, shoulders squared yet clearly uncertain. He adjusted the collar of his checkered shirt, the one Claire had offhandedly said looked nice on him. It wasn't new, but tonight it felt different. Then he saw her. Claire approached through the crowd, the evening sun casting a warm halo across her face. She wore a light summer dress, simple but striking, and her hair was tucked behind one ear in that absent-minded way she always did when nervous. When she reached him, she offered a quiet smile, not the playful one she gave neighbors or the guarded one she wore in class, but something gentler, something meant just for him. "You made it," she said, brushing an invisible wrinkle from her dress. "Wouldn't miss it," he replied, voice lower than usual. They began walking, slow and aimless, weaving through the booths selling handmade soaps, wind chimes, old books. Their arms brushed more than once, neither apologizing. The rhythm of the town pulsed around them, familiar faces waving, murmurs rising and falling like wind through leaves. Claire noticed the looks first. Mrs. Kendricks from the bakery elbowed her husband and nodded in their direction. A pair of high school boys whispered behind corn dogs. Not judgmental, just curious. Observing. Daniel felt it too. His steps faltered for half a second, the instinct to retreat tugging at him. But Claire nudged him gently with her shoulder, eyes twinkling with mischief. "They're just surprised I didn't come alone," she teased. He gave a small laugh. "You usually do?" She shrugged. "People see what they expect. Maybe it's time they saw something else." The words settled over him slowly. He didn't answer, didn't have to. They continued on, passing a street musician playing a wistful tune on an old violin. Claire dropped a bill into the open case, and Daniel paused, watching her with a kind of quiet awe. She made ordinary moments feel intentional, like nothing in the world was too small to matter. As the sky darkened, the crowd drifted toward the open field at the town's edge, where the fireworks would begin. Daniel and Claire found a patch of grass beneath a large oak tree. They sat close, knees nearly touching, hearts a little closer still. The first firework exploded in the sky, scattering red and gold embers across the dark canvas. Claire looked up, face illuminated in bursts of color, breath caught in her throat, not from the fireworks, but from the weight of the moment. Daniel turned to her, unsure of what to do with the sudden ache in his chest. His hand hovered beside hers, fingers twitching slightly, afraid of breaking the fragile stillness between them. Then, slowly, he reached over and took her hand in his. Not tightly, not possessively, just enough to say, "I'm here, if you'll have me." Claire didn't look at him. She didn't need to. Her fingers curled around his, answering a question he hadn't dared ask aloud. The fireworks continued, louder now, but neither of them noticed. They were watching something else unfold, something quieter, more fragile than a grand confession, yet somehow more honest. In that moment, there were no crowds, no whispers. Just two people, side by side, finally beginning to believe they could stand that way. It started on an ordinary afternoon. Claire was pruning the hydrangeas near the front steps when a car she hadn't seen in months pulled into her driveway. She stood up slowly, heart tightening as the door opened, and he stepped out, Mark, her ex-husband. Polished, as always. Same designer shoes, same casual arrogance resting behind his charm. "Claire," he said, like no time had passed. "We need to talk." She didn't answer at first. The last time they'd spoken, it ended with slammed doors and signed papers. Yet here he was, acting as if conversations like this were still his right. From across the street, Daniel had just stepped out of the local hardware store, a bag of screws in one hand. He spotted Claire instantly. But she wasn't alone. The man standing with her, tall, well-dressed, confident, was leaning in, saying something Daniel couldn't hear. Claire didn't move. She didn't smile. But she also didn't walk away. Daniel's chest grew tight. He didn't recognize the man, but he didn't need to. The body language told him everything, or so he thought. He didn't stay to see more. He turned, walked back to his truck, and drove away without a sound. No questions. No confrontation. Just distance, fast and final. Back in the driveway, Claire crossed her arms. "What do you want, Mark?" "A chance," he said, voice smooth. "I've made mistakes. I thought maybe we could talk. Maybe get dinner." She shook her head, stunned that he could stand there so calmly, as if he hadn't torn her world apart. "No," she said firmly. "There's nothing to talk about." He tried again, but she stepped back. "I'm not the woman you walked away from, and I'm not interested in turning back." Mark's jaw tightened. Without another word, he climbed into his car and drove off. As the dust settled, Claire exhaled, unaware that someone else had already disappeared from her life that day. Hours passed. Evening set in. Claire called Daniel. No answer. She texted, "Hey, are you free?" Nothing. She called again the next day. Straight to voicemail. Confusion gave way to worry. Worry to hurt. And hurt to something heavier, abandonment. Her mind raced with possibilities. Had she said too much? Moved too fast? Had the softness between them been just a passing flicker? In his apartment, Daniel sat by the window, Claire's name flashing on his screen. He watched it ring, thumb hovering but never pressing. He told himself it was better this way. He'd been wrong to imagine a place in her life. Men like him didn't get endings that healed, they got quiet exits. He stared out the window at the familiar road that no longer felt welcoming. Claire, meanwhile, stared at her phone. A dozen drafts sat unsent. She couldn't bring herself to write the one message she really wanted to. Why did you pull away? Because if he had already chosen to walk away, asking would only make the silence louder. They each retreated into their own rooms, their own pasts, the walls they'd once begun to tear down, now quickly rebuilding. Neither of them knew the truth. Both had made quiet assumptions and let fear do the talking. The space between them, once bridged by gentle moments and shared silences, now echoed with all the things left unsaid. In different corners of the same small town, two people sat in their own stillness, wounded not by betrayal, but by misunderstanding. And neither yet knew how easily something fragile could be lost, without a single word. The pen hovered above the page, trembling slightly in Claire's hand. She had rewritten the opening 5 times. Dear Daniel had never looked so fragile, so unsure. But this time, she didn't cross it out. She let the silence of her study wrap around her like a blanket and began to write, not carefully, but truthfully. She wrote of the moment he first arrived with a toolbox and a shy nod, of the way he fixed more than a flickering light that day. She wrote about his steadiness, his presence, the way his silence never felt empty. She wrote of how her life had been made of echoes until he stepped in, and how terrified she'd been when he stepped back out. And finally, she wrote the line that cost her the most to admit. I never meant to hurt you, Daniel. I just didn't know someone like you could be real. By the time the ink dried, the letter felt less like a confession and more like a key, one she hoped might still open a door. She folded it, placed it inside a plain white envelope, and slipped it into his mailbox just before dawn. No name, no return address, just hope. Daniel found the letter that evening. He almost didn't check the mailbox. Habit had become routine, and routine had become the soft shell he'd retreated into since the day he'd seen her with that man. But there it was, unexpected, unassuming, waiting among bills and coupons like it had every right to be there. He read it once, then twice. By the third time, his hand shook, and the breath in his lungs felt too tight to stay. The letter didn't beg. It didn't explain in detail. It simply spoke the truth, a truth he'd been too afraid to reach for. He set the letter on the porch table and stared at the sky. The sun had begun to dip, coloring the clouds in streaks of amber and rose. A soft wind stirred the leaves. For a long moment, he didn't move. Then he stood. The walk to her house was only 5 minutes, but it felt like crossing a bridge he'd burned with his own fear. Each step carried the weight of regret, vulnerability, and the faintest hope that maybe not everything was lost. He didn't knock. Claire had just finished folding laundry when she heard the footsteps outside. Her heart stuttered. She moved slowly, afraid to hope too soon. But when she opened the door and saw him standing there, still in his work shirt, still quiet but no longer closed, she didn't speak. Neither did he. They stood for a moment, like the pause between verses of a song that knew how to wait for its own rhythm. Then, Daniel stepped forward and wrapped his arms around her. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't polished. It was real, two people holding on, not because everything had been fixed, but because they were willing to stop running. Claire buried her face in his shoulder, the tension melting away. He didn't let go. When they finally stepped back, she reached for his hand. And hand in hand, they walked to the front of her garage, back to the place where everything had begun. The light above the door still shone. But tonight, it glowed warmer, brighter, casting soft halos around them as they stood beneath it. Not as two people uncertain, but as two souls finally willing to meet in the middle. No more words were needed. The light he once fixed had found its purpose. So had they. Don't forget to smash that like button, hit subscribe, and turn on notifications. Share this video. Thank you.